Summers in the 80s, watching TV, dancing lazy, can't believe that's how I spent all my time. Every day I watch a show and it's the one that you all know. Wacky stories of those kids who went to Bayside High. It's alright, cause you remember that. It's alright, say you remember that. It's alright, do you remember that show? Hey there, TV lovers, and welcome to the kickoff of our special 4-part series, Saved by the Summer. For the next 4 episodes, we're diving into the world of Saved by the Bell to explore the prequels and sequel series that surrounded the ubiquitous and beloved NBC teen sitcom that ran from 1989 to 1982. I'm Adam.
And I'm Will, and this is Remember That Show? That's right, we'll be diving deep into Saved by the Bell, the new class, Saved by the Bell, the college years, the Peacock streaming legacy reboot, and the show that started it all, Good Morning, Miss Bliss.
Yes, indeed. But before we get into all that, we've got to ride the time-traveling school bus back to our own TV-obsessed childhoods in a segment we call Theme Song. So every student looked forward to the days in class where the teacher decided to stop yammering about grammar or history and decided to let a film strip or a videotape do the talking instead. So, Will, can you think of a favorite experience where you got to watch something on a TV screen during school?
Okay, so I went to private school. I went to this Lutheran school from kindergarten through 6th grade. So we kind of had these routines set in stone where it was Thursdays was always a film strip and it was something religious. And then Fridays would be movies in the afternoon. But we didn't have that whole setup where you wheel in the cart with the TV. No, our local library still had reel-to-reel movies, and our 2nd grade teacher would rent one every week, and the one we always looked forward to was called The Mouse and the Motorcycle. It's based on a book that I don't think I ever read, but we still loved this live action film. So anytime it was what are we gonna watch? It's this The Mouse on the Motorcycle. That was the best Friday ever, So that's what we watched in school. And then of course in middle school we all watched the OJ verdict together, and we learned where people's loyalties were. But how about you?
Well, I mean, I very much remember also in elementary school, we did have, the carts that they would wheel in, but we had something very unique in the architecture of our school. My school was called Culverdale, and it was literally built in the shape of a C. It was crazy. It was some real, supervillain stuff,
Yes.
But
gotta love it.
They also didn't have individual classrooms. It was just one long hallway, the entire C, and each classroom was just a partition, like a handball court. It was just like a big wall, and then you could see the other class across the way from you, but you couldn't see the class on the other side of the wall. But in between each grade level, they had these little mini amphitheaters. They were carpeted. It was really strange. So anyway, the teachers would wheel in the TV cart, and the one I remember the most was somebody that was telling a fairy tale, a famous fairy tale, but then there was an artist who was actually drawing it while they were relating the story itself. And I would just be mesmerized, because they would have charcoal and all this stuff. They're making an eye. What's it going to be? Later on, though, in 5th grade, in our science class, we watched the show called The Voyage of the Mimi. And I don't know if you ever heard of this, The Voyage of the Mimi. It was about a group of marine biologists or oceanographers. We were supposed to learn something that was sciencey, It was from 1984. And years later, I looked it up only to find that it featured a young Ben Affleck. The Voyage of the Mimi. Anybody out there? Finally, this is what I was curious to know if you saw this maybe just on your TV viewing, but instead of math lessons sometimes, they would show us this PBS series called Square One Television. And it had a Dragnet parody called MathNet. James Earl Jones was on it. Yardley Smith did an episode. It was just weird. So did you watch Square One?
No, but I knew about it. I was never a math kid, so I wasn't gravitating to math-utainment or whatever we want to call it. math attainment, but I knew of his existence.
Okay.
All right, well, our topic of discussion today surrounds the relationship of a teacher to her students and the effect that an educator can have on the lives of young people. Adam, do you have a favorite teacher from your school days?
Well, I will say in elementary school, my third grade teacher, Mrs. McDonald, was memorable because she did not have any patience for these children. She must have been teaching for 20 odd years. If you ran up and interrupted her, like if you didn't just sit at your seat and raise your hand, but you went up to go tell her you needed something, she'd be like, "Are you bleeding? Is your eyeball hanging from a thread? Then sit down." That was graphic. Your eyeball hanging from a thread, that's some mad balls stuff right there, you know? But I guess she just cracked me up because she was cartoonishly grumpy. But in junior high, if I had a teacher I felt like inspired me in any way, it was my humanities teacher. Her name was Mrs. Will, and she was really cool. We were writing like little skits, we'd write original stories. She just was always encouraging us to be creative. Although one time, I will tell you, Will, I got too comfortable with her. Like on the show we're going to talk about tonight, these kids get away with saying a lot of things they shouldn't. But I had just seen the Brady Bunch movie. And in the Brady Bunch movie, Greg says, "Hey there, groovy chick," to some hot 90s girl, right? And it was totally outdated. So I often made Mrs. Will laugh. So I thought it'd be funny if I said that to a 50-year-old gray-haired lady, and she shut me down real quick, okay? Not appropriate, Adam. Sorry. Scamper off.
My grooviness is no business of yours.
In high school, my drama teacher, Mr. Trevino, because he was running the department like a professional theater. It was very cutthroat. He was very intense about it, but he was also very gay. So he said a lot of passive aggressive things to us that would create a lot of drama. And my favorite quote was he was just stressed out during one of our rehearsals. We were all just being ridiculous or whatever. He just threw up his hands. He's like, "You know what? You don't get life. And that's sad." And I was like, "Yeah, we're teenagers. Of course we don't get life, whatever that means." You know, so apparently teachers who were mean to me, that's what I remember. And I treasure those memories. But what about you, Will?
Oh man, so many. Because I was always that kid who like would hang out around teachers. Like I'm an old soul. So like in elementary, like I was just talking about with the film strips and everything, I guess my favorite teacher was also our principal. His name is Mr. Schnackenberg, and he was like the tallest man I ever knew. Because like I started there in kindergarten, and this guy seemed like a giant. I think in actuality he's like 6'4", and like he was in private school, like with small classrooms and all that. Like they do know you and they know your families. So it was like, and I had one of those like helicopter moms who was like always in the office. So it was like, I got to know Mr. Schnackenberg very well. Like he would come to like my grandmother's birthday parties and things like that. So like he's a cool guy. I should reach out to him because give people their flowers when they're with us. And then in middle school, we call him Dave. I guess in teacher parlance, he's Mr. Jacobs, but he came from this like hippie school where like all the kids called the teachers by their first name, which didn't really gel at this prep school, but whatever. He's Dave. So Dave was important because he took me to Russia. He was the one like who was in charge of that class that was going to Russia. And it was just like, I got to know him very well because my host family was a student that like he actually knew. It wasn't just like someone picked from the like program. So like we got to really be close through that. And then he had this like midlife change where he's like, "You know what? I'm not going to teach. I want to be a doctor, but I'm not going to go to med school in America." So he went to Grenada. And so he's currently a doctor in New Zealand. So he occasionally gets to America, but I haven't seen him since like my high school graduation. And then in high school, it would be Miss Robbins. I refuse to call her her first name, even though like I just talked to her 3 days ago. She was my drama teacher. She's the one who got me into like performing and all that. But most importantly, she's the one who got me in my career because she had started a performing arts charter school at this point like 15 years ago. And I needed work and she brought me on to just do like inventory of their textbooks, and then they needed like a data person. I was like, oh, we can teach you. And now 15 years later, that's what I do, and I'm still going to her for jobs because, like I said, I talked to her 3 days ago. So I don't really let go of teachers. Like a lot of my Facebook friends, I have my third grade teacher, I have my high school English teacher, all the ones who I don't think will be offended by my posts, I've accepted their friend requests. So.
That is wild to me. I could never imagine being friendly with a teacher, even though some of the teachers at my high school, for example, one of them married my friend's dad. It was one of those situations like happened on this series that we're going to talk about. There was a little parent teacher romance, and I was just like, that's nuts to me. I think in some places that would be a red light. You wouldn't like to see that. But in other places, they want a show just like this, and we want to find out how it got the green light. All right, well, teachers on TV had earned good grades from the viewers going as far back as Gabe Kaplan on Welcome Back, Kotter in the 70s, Howard Hessman or Billy Connolly on Head of the Class in the 80s, even The Greatest American Hero. A lot of people forget William Catt was a remedial school teacher when he wasn't crashing into things with his super alien suit, right? Then there was the pinnacle of 90s educational comedy, Nick Frito, licensed teacher. Just kidding. How about Drexel's Class? Okay, better, but not quite there yet. Hanging with Mr. Cooper? Oh, we're so close. Okay, Boy Meets World, because everybody knows it was really all about the Feeney factor, right? Anyway, the point is we had a lot of teachers on the small screen who taught us important lessons in and out of the classroom. So, Will, did you have a favorite television teacher?
Yeah, I was in the Feeney boat because he was the voice of Kit. You know, and like growing up, Feeney seemed really wise. It's one of those, like, I remember like watching Boy Meets World. I'm like, wow, he's kind of lucky that like his teacher is his backyard neighbor, you know? But I've recently been doing a rewatch of Boy Meets World, and so many things bother me, and Feeney is one of them where I'm like, okay, this guy, like, give it a rest. Like, he follows him to college, and then he pops up in Girl Meets World. I'm like, he's not dead yet. Like, I know William Daniels is still like, you don't need to bring him here. Like, it's a weird episode. You almost could think maybe he was a ghost. But it's Feeney. How about you?
Well, like I said, I was not looking to have a relationship with a teacher. I was not looking for a teacher to actually guide my life. So I wanted a teacher who would entertain me. And if there is an entertaining teacher on television for me, it's Mr. Tuttle from Saved by the Bell. To me, if he had been my actual teacher, every one of his classes, and he taught so many at Bayside, I would have been signing up for. He had the best line delivery of any of the teachers, and on every level, if you look at it, he was hilarious. He was a little round guy, so he looked funny. He had a high voice, so he sounded funny. He was smarmy and petty, so he acted funny. Especially, I always feel like his rivalry with Mr. Belding, because there was a real backstory there about him being next in line for the position of principal of Bayside. So he was always needling Belding with little quips and stuff. Like, he was the utility teacher. And I love that. You know, obviously Glee Club and the marketing class and all this stuff. But when he was the driving instructor, I just love when he's like, pushy, move your tushy. Which, not appropriate actually, but hilarious.
See, I was a Mr. Dewey guy. He just hated his life and did not want to be there.
But he was going to go beyond American Gladiators.
Yes. Well, as for the star of our series, Hayley Mills, as a child, she made waves in the entertainment industry during the 50s and 60s, specifically as the star of Disney films like Pollyanna, The Parent Trap, and That Darn Cat, which made her a favorite for families at the box office. By age 20, she decided not to renew her contract with Disney and had a turn as a troublemaking student in The Trouble with Angels, which was a hit. Though she worked throughout the 70s in theater and in films, Mills finally decided to come back to Disney in the 80s for several The Parent Trap sequels on The Wonderful World of Disney, one of which also starred future Saved by the Bell cast member Leanna Creel. Mills had also made a few guest appearances on TV shows like The Love Boat and Murder, She Wrote, which primed her to star in her own series being developed by NBC in partnership with Disney. Adam, Did you have any connection to the films of Hayley Mills before seeing her as an adult on Good Morning, Miss Bliss?
I mean, I remember seeing the big white Disney clamshell for Pollyanna that had her picture on the front at the video store. When I would watch the Disney Channel, they would have promos like Pollyanna coming up tonight at 7. I'd be like, I definitely don't want to watch that. Eventually, I did see The Parent Trap in my teens, and I thought it was a very funny movie, but really that's it. Like, she wasn't an icon to me, but I did know that she existed. Like, she just was always there in some form. How about you?
Yeah, same thing. Like, I did not like The Wonderful World of Disney. People forget that was like in Disney's like the troubled period. Like, we hadn't gotten to The Little Mermaid yet, and it would come on like every Sunday. And I was like, ugh, this colorized mess. You know, if it was like the Apple Dumpling Gang or something, I'll watch anything with Don Knotts. But nah, if I saw this, I turned it off. Like, to me, The Parent Trap is Lindsay Lohan, and I still never watched that. So, like, she didn't really do it for me. She had that look kind of like, as Michelle Tanner called her, Annette Funny Jello. You know, it's like I knew she was from like the old days, the old era, but she didn't really hold much meaning for me.
Yeah, well, I mean, at this point, she was, in her 40s. She's returning to TV. She was getting the key to the network washroom, you might say. So she was going to take the elevator up to get her chance at TV stardom. So we want to find out just what was it all about in our elevator pitch. So, Will, Good Morning, Miss Bliss was a 1987 TV pilot that aired on NBC. You didn't know there was a pilot episode that didn't get picked up by the network for a full series? Well, we're going to tell you all about it. So this pilot introduced a teacher named Carrie Bliss, who is instructing middle school students in Indiana while adjusting to life with her new husband, whom she married impulsively over the summer break. Now, the original pilot episode focused on Miss Bliss's attempt to help a depressed student who had just moved to town deal with the death of his older brother. So yeah, a laugh riot, this one.
Hayley Mills played Miss Bliss in the pilot, while the students were a cast of future TV stars like 90210's Brian Austin Green as the yuppie in training Adam, the man who would be Urkel, Jaleel White as the charismatic Bobby Wilson, an eventual cast member and director of WandaVision, Matt Shackman as the amorous Georgie Winslow, and future crew member on Sequest DSV, Jonathan Brandis as the new kid, Michael Thompson. Mr. Belding did exist in this pilot as well, but was played by Oliver Clark, aka Joe from Ernest Saves Christmas, the man who becomes the new Santa Claus by the film's end. There was also a fellow teacher named Tina Palladrino, played by a tall, fashionable blonde named Maria O'Brien. So let's take a minute here to talk about this Zach, Lisa, and Screechless pilot. Adam, what did you think?
Well, this was interesting. This is something I had long heard the rumor of, but I had never watched. And the first thing that catches me were the opening credits are so weird. It is the most like saccharine, they're black and white sketches of Hayley Mills throughout her life as a child up to being an adult, but they're obviously based on like movie roles that she played. Like there's one where she looks like Pollyanna. She has the same outfit on, but they were supposed to like represent Miss Bliss's journey to becoming a teacher. And it's really, really slow and really, you're just like, oh, I don't know what the show's going to be, but it's too lovey-dovey. What'd you think of it?
Yeah, the opening credits, you really nailed it there. This, first and foremost, is a Hayley Mills vehicle. They wanted to be in the Hayley Mills business, and they threw this together for Hayley Mills. This is about a teacher and a career woman who happens to be around some kids every now and then. This could air after like Kate and Allie on CBS, and it would just be some forgotten show. It's just the struggles of an 80s teacher and woman in the workforce, but the kids come second. And like you said, those credits, they do not set the tone even for what the show is, because I feel like they overestimated the audience's like zeal for Hayley Mills. It's like, this isn't like Tony Danza coming home. This isn't Elvis coming back from the war. This is Pollyanna. But like, they really laid on thick in those credits.
They did their best with the kids they got. obviously, because like now I will say I could do without the Brian Austin Green character. They don't give him anything to do other than give Miss Bliss a business card, being like, like he's wearing a suit and he's like, oh, look at me, I want to be on Wall Street, basically. But I really like the Georgie and Bobby characters. So Jaleel White, Matt Shackman, they have a great running gag where they're always trading sandwiches in class just before the bell rings, which I found really endearing. But what I find for a show that was focusing on the teacher, for a show that was focused on Miss Bliss, they do not make her like someone you respect or understand or connect to. Like, what is up with Miss Bliss getting engaged and married within a 3-month period to a guy she obviously knew nothing about? Because he's there, like, unpacking all his stuff, and he tells her he skydives as a hobby. And she's like, what? Like, she was oblivious to that? That is something that comes up during a first or second dinner date. And if it's really a passion for him, he's taken her to jump out of an airplane by the third date. How could she not know about that, Or, like, the husband, he is likable, but you can tell he does not belong. There's no space for him in this story. They feel like strangers, like he's like some neighbor that just wanders over every once in a while. And then within that, the way they mix him in sort of is there's like a B or maybe even a C story probably about one of the kids. Georgie has a crush on her. He sends roses to the house and he sexually harasses her in class, talks about, I love teachers with great legs and all this stuff. And there's just too much going on in this one pilot. And that's not all of it. But like, what did you think about the husband character?
Yeah, he doesn't fit. The weird thing is like, what we know of Miss Bliss in this pilot, she's not the person who would have impulsively gotten married. Like, that's just like Tina would have done that. Miss Bliss wouldn't have done that unless she got like some diagnosis that she was about to die, or she had just gotten out of some trauma, or this is a midlife crisis. But like, there's no real love here. There's like we can make this work. It's like they both see potential in each other, but like the husband's bringing strong stepdad energy, but since she doesn't have kids, it goes to the students, which gets real weird because like even at the end when like he and like Bobby or whatever, they come to this like stalemate, he gives Bobby money for the roses that he had sent to Miss Bliss. I'm just like, this is the 80s. We're told not to talk to strangers, don't take candy from strangers, don't take money from strangers. They're trying, but it's almost like his brother was the producer. It was like, yeah, I'll get you started with a gig. Like, he serves no purpose there.
No, and the thing is, like, what's odd is that's a whole sitcom on its own. But then this episode, this pilot, they're cramming 3 episodes worth of stories into one because the Jonathan Brandis character, he is grumpy about having been made to move to Indianapolis, but then literally the day after, his brother dies. That is a hat on a hat. The first story makes sense. Miss Bliss, she has to win the kid over. She's going to help him adjust to a new school. He'll make friends in a new town. But why do you then have to do the very special episode dramatic story during the second half of the same pilot? Like, because the resolution ultimately is now he's willing to accept that he can still think about his brother even though he died, and he can tell nice stories about his brother in class as part of a report, as part of an assignment. He should not be in school 48 hours after his brother just died.
I think we talked about this last episode. Like, I know we've talked about it recently somewhere, but the problem here is this is 1987-88 NBC. Another show from that era is Punky Brewster. And Punky Brewster did not know how to be a normal show. Like, we look back at it and there's the one episode. There's just one episode of Punky Brewster that everyone knows, and they think of it as this very special episode because it was written by a viewer. Cherry almost dies in the refrigerator. Like, that stuck with us. But if you go back and binge Punky Brewster, it is 4 seasons of Downer. No, correction. It's 2 seasons of Downer, all of which are on NBC. And then when it goes to syndication, it gets the wacky colors, and she's on roller skates, and she works at a diner because Henry doesn't develop film anymore. Like, they figured it out. But there was something about like late 80s Highway to Heaven NBC that they always needed to bring you down.
Well, and the craziest thing is, like, outside of all of that, this is the logic leap that I don't understand, which is, when the kid comes and says, I can't go home because my brother died, I guess it's because he feels bad being home. It reminds him of his brother. It hurts too much. She lets him stay the night at her house. Her new husband just moved in. She's making the kid breakfast in the morning. She doesn't even call his parents, as far as we know. It's like, boundaries, Miss Bliss. This is not okay.
That was kind of the part that resonated with me because, like, they're trying to show us that Miss Bliss isn't just any regular teacher. This isn't your dad's teacher. This is a teacher who goes above and beyond. But the powerful part is when Building in name only tells her, just don't get involved. Just teach. And that's still going on. But like that's like we watch these shows and we try to see like what's different and what has changed and what's the same. That's the same. Having been in education for 15 years at this point, God, I'm so old. Just teach. She couldn't do that, So with that, I'm curious to know what kind of trajectory she would have been on because like you're saying, there are no boundaries there and she's cruising for bruising. But like TV wasn't like it is now. Now that would be a 13 episode season. By like episode 6, she's been reported to the school board. There's a hearing by episode 12. It's a 2-part episode. And then depending on the ratings, we'll see if she gets to keep her license or if she leaves the profession that she's always wanted to be in.
Yeah, I mean, this would not have ended well for Miss Bliss. But here's the thing. So after that original pilot was rejected, the concept was retooled by the same NBC production team, but now for the Disney Channel cable network, where it ran for a single season of 13 episodes from fall 1988 to spring 1989. And it was still set in Indiana. Miss Bliss, though, was no longer a newlywed, but now a widow of 3 years. And she's got a whole new class of children to teach, which included now the familiar faces. Mark Paul Gosselaar as the smooth talking schemer Zach Morris, Lark Voorhees as the fashion-obsessed Lisa Turtle, Dustin Diamond as the awkward and innocent Samuel Screech Powers. Now, also in this group, there were friends that we hadn't seen if we didn't know anything other than Saved by the Bell. There was Heather Hopper as the morally outspoken Nikki Coleman, and Max Batimo as Mikey Gonzalez, Zach's best friend and a sensitive soul. And this version of the show recast Mr. Belding with Dennis Haskins, who would go on to be the longest-running cast member throughout all incarnations of the series. But they changed the vibe of the character considerably for the Tina Palladrino character, because now they have this small, nervous brunette named Joan Ryan in the part. But they also mix in T.K. Carter as the eccentric school maintenance supervisor, Milo Williams.
Yeah, this retooled Good Morning Miss Bliss series focused more on the students than the personal life of the teacher and added more comedic elements to the formula. But after airing those 13 episodes, the series was not renewed by the Disney Channel, instead being reclaimed by NBC to be revamped into a new show set in high school called Saved by the Bell, which began airing on Saturday mornings in the fall of 1989. Saved by the Bell transplanted Zach, Lisa, Screech, and Mr. Belding to California, leaving Miss Bliss, Tina, Milo, Mikey, and Nikki in Indiana. Of course, 99% of us saw these episodes in syndication as part of the rotation of Saved by the Bell episodes, which featured new introductions by Zach, who would reminisce about their days together in junior high, with all the original music replaced by the Saved by the Bell musical stings.
All right, so Will, we always try to figure out, in our fan fiction, in our heads, we're trying to say, okay, how does this work? How does Good Morning Miss Bliss connect to, Saved by the Bell? That one's difficult, but I do think I can connect the pilot that did not get picked up to this series that we did actually get, because like we said there, Miss Bliss goes from being a newlywed to being a widow. So obviously her husband died skydiving and she didn't get over it. And this is years later and she's trying to make a go of it again. She's really committed herself to the teaching. She has no one to hold her back, nobody talking in her ear except for Mr. Belding every once in a while, So I think that's what it is. Like that's the connective tissue I find.
Okay.
Yeah, but let's see what we thought about this series. Okay, these 13 episodes, what did they mean to us? Were we getting laughs? Were we getting the feels? So let's give them our cheers. So Will, what are you thinking about Good Morning Miss Bliss? What did you think back in the day when you watched it? What are you thinking now?
Oh man, I've waited forever for this. So with the dawn of the internet, a lot of people use it for different things. We were at an age, maybe we were looking up things we shouldn't have been looking for, things like that. When I was introduced to the internet, I needed to solve two of the greatest mysteries that had plagued my childhood. First of all, was how did they make those junior high episodes of Saved by the Bell? And second of all, what happened to Jesse and Kelly when Tori showed up? Like, you don't understand. Like, this isn't just something in the back of my head. This is something like I'm that grizzled PI who wakes up every morning looking at the like bent up photo of his lost love. Like, that's what Saved by the Bell meant to me. And I needed answers. So, to be perfectly honest, I didn't know Good Morning Miss Bliss existed until the internet, because like in school, this wasn't when Disney Channel was in like every cable package, and we've already mentioned that I didn't have cable at all, but the kids at my school, there was like one or two who had Disney Channel, and I feel like they would say something like, oh, it used to be this show called Good Morning Miss Bliss. I'm like, shut up, this doesn't make any sense. But then like in the syndication packages, like you're saying, it's like they would have those bumpers of showing the junior high stuff, and it was always weird because those weren't really made until like season 2 of Saved by the Bell. So like you've got like 16-year-old Zach reminiscing about junior high. I can be slow sometimes. I remember when I was little and didn't understand syndication, so I thought every time you saw a rerun, they were actually performing the show again. So I'd be like, wow, Suzanne Summers looks great for her age. So it's the same thing there. Like I didn't understand things. It was always like, how did he's old, but you can't travel through time, and the show didn't exist then. So like the internet solved it for me, and it put certain things to rest. But like watching them back then, I didn't like them. I mean, they were quote unquote new episodes to me, but I didn't like Mikey because I already knew Slater. So Mikey is like, we've got Slater at home. And like Nikki has seeds of Jesse in her, but I was attracted to Jesse and not to Nikki, So it was kind of like, they're these quirky kind of like, it's almost like bonus features, like webisodes that they used to include on DVD sets. But I've always been about continuity and canon, and since they never really fit, and since there was never any backstory or cover as to why these four families uprooted from Indiana and moved to California, these are just these quirky little quaint things that exist, but I didn't like them. I didn't really like Miss Bliss because I thought she was crossing boundaries at the time, but like, yeah, I didn't love them.
That's where you're at. I was always fascinated because any hidden bit of lore to me was always like, I can't believe there's this thing that isn't the main thing that I know. And now I can see, this behind the scenes evolution is what I was thinking at the time. Now, I think Heather Hopper as Nikki is a great addition to the show, just in terms of being Zach's conscience and really likable. She's very interesting as an actor, just being on screen. She's funny. She's really unique. But I think they write her in an interesting way where she's not annoyingly moralistic like Jesse ends up being, and that's what I like. Like she has her opinions and stuff, but she's not like cartoonishly the environmentalist or the feminist or whatever, Now that being said, I don't think Heather Hopper would have worked in the Saved by the Bell formula, which was hot teens being funny, because she's not traditionally attractive in that 80s early 90s sense, and I think that would have thrown off the chemistry. Like Jesse Spano and AC Slater, they seem like a realistic high school couple, opposites attract maybe, but I can't see a world where Nikki and Slater got together. You would have looked at it and you would have said, I don't know that this would happen. The thing about Good Morning Miss Bliss that always caught me was how fully formed the Zach Morris character was from the beginning. The writing is literally the same here as it is throughout Saved by the Bell and everything else. It's like they struck gold with Mark Paul Gosselaar. Like he got it from the beginning and they knew what to give him. And that's the thing, for better or for worse, the Zach character never really evolves beyond his standard tendencies. Like, because Lisa, Screech, Mr. Belding, they all become considerably more cartoonish the longer those characters appear in the series, I feel like. But Zach is kind of always Zach. back. And, he's a schemer, but then he sometimes feels bad about it and he apologizes, but then he's back to his old ways again. I was impressed by that. And he wouldn't have fit on Saved by the Bell, but I like the Milo character because I remember you were just talking about Punky Brewster. I remember TK Carter from Punky Brewster, and I really enjoyed him whenever I would see him pop up on other shows and things like that. He just, for this particular series, he gave it the comedic energy that they ultimately lean into with Saved by the Bell. So I think he had the right inclination for what they needed, but that's not what they were writing at the time because they were playing to the more subdued Haley Mills, type of attitude. And now off the air, Will, you and I were talking, you said there's only one good episode. Before we get into what that is, I do just want to say, I think there are a solid 3 of the 13 that are good. There's the Wall Street episode where Zach and Mikey secretly switched the class stock market investment to potatoes, and they earned big bucks, but they bought it on margin, and so it cost Miss Bliss all the money she had saved up to buy a new car. Like, that's a classic Zach scheme. It actually taught me about the stock market. There is the Practical Jokes episode where the kids are trying to trick the unprankable Miss Bliss, and then Screech gets put on mock trial for falsely admitting to putting paint on her chair. That's a lot of fun. But of course, there is one shining star of this short-lived series. What is it, Will?
That star would be pop sensation
Stevie!
The Stevie episode where she has a secret identity almost like Jerrica in Gem. She can move amongst the population as just a regular girl, but when it's showtime, she becomes Stevie. And I guess she's like a former student of Miss Bliss. Growing up, I was like, that's weird. But then I grew up with weird relationships with teachers, and now I get it. So it's kind of like but she was still like 14. But like, yeah, if I was in town, I'd probably stay with my teacher or something like that. But like, she was so convincing to me that I thought Stevie was an actual pop star. Because this is a point in Will's timeline where I don't know present music. Like, at this point, I was listening to country. I didn't know what pop was. I missed Milli Vanilli. I missed Paula Abdul. Like, I was attracted to Paula Abdul, but only like 2 songs. Like, I missed The Party. I missed all of those New Kids on the Block. I didn't know anything of that unless they were on Saturday morning videos. So I'm thinking Stevie was this one-hit wonder up until the internet. Where it's like, oh, they made that up.
Yeah, I mean, that is the thing. Like, whenever Saved by the Bell did music, they really did it right. Like, it was believable, it was well produced, and you really got into it. Now, Stevie was like every fantasy of my 80s childhood rolled into one. Like, cute older girl who looks like many of my babysitters from the 80s? Check. Catchy 80s pop music? Check. Secret undercover celebrity identity? A proto Hannah Montana? All right. Of course, I mean, like, the biggest wish fulfillment is just like the cute older girl wanting to prove to you she's attractive and kissing you? Come on now. But that song, Hotline to Your Heart or Hotline, whatever it's called, that has been in my head for 30 years. And I used to have it recorded off TV on a cassette tape along with all the Zack Attack songs, and I listened to it endlessly. The whole reason I even bought the Saved by the Bell box set was to have a high quality, clean version of that song to rip as an MP3 so I could listen to it all the time. I do want to say though, the behind the scenes is fascinating. That this Suzanne Terra, who was playing the role of Stevie or Colleen, she was working at NBC. I've heard like Heather Hopper, I think, said it was in the cafeteria. I feel like one time I heard something about working at a gift shop or something. But either way, she was like discovered by the producers. Like, and then they said, "Oh yeah, you should come in and play this." Like Heather Hopper said, one day she saw her working at the studio. The next day she was on the set with her. That's pretty wild. Now she had a short acting career and ended in 1995. But I mean, she was on 90210. She was on Models Inc. She was on Doogie Howser. She was even on Freddy's Nightmares. Had a whole episode that she was the star of.
She did it all. Like, there's no reason to keep going.
She hit the pinnacle. So
Yeah.
yeah, but I mean that episode, it's just there's just a magic about it that really pops in every way. And yeah, that should have been a spin-off series, honestly.
I mean, again, we're going back to 80s NBC. For some reason, Andy Gibb used to pop into shows a lot. Like, again, Punky Brewster. So knowing that they would have these, like, not A-list singers helped contribute to my thinking Stevie was a real performer. And wherever she is right now, she needs to know. I bet she's killing karaoke night at the local Holiday Inn. She was great. And like another cheer I think I'm too hard on the cast in the sense that I saw them second. That's really what goes against them. If I had seen Good Morning Miss Bliss first, I would probably not like Mario Lopez because I like Mikey. And I think Mikey and Nikki could have been a couple in high school. You know, like I say, just like wipe the background and move everything to California, you know, but Miss Bliss wasn't going to work because, as we said before, this was clearly a Haley Mills vehicle. And by this point, with Zach Morris being a fully developed character, she finds herself in the Reginald VelJohnson slot as she watches Urkel become the star of the show.
Yep.
So there's no future for Miss Bliss, but the kids easily all could have come to California as far as I'm concerned, because I do like Nikki, but like you said, she wasn't gonna be in like Tiger Beat, you know, it was that kind of thing. But 80s hot is 90s ugly. And like it's right on that cusp where it was like a lot of people who started this show would have been hot when it ended. Like Chad would beat me up for this. I don't think Kelly Kapowski is attractive until that actress goes to 90210. I do not think Tiffany Amber's not in college, not in high school. That entire period she needed to eat several sandwiches. But like that's just the time. That's what was hot then, you know? So
well, you kind of touched on some of these earlier, so I think it's time we get into our jeers. Boo! 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 I'll just start off by agreeing, even in the retooled version, you know, they've killed off Miss Bliss's husband. They spend still too much time on her personal life. Like there's an episode where Tina moves in as her roommate, or, you know, and all that kind of stuff. And you're just like, she's a 40-year-old woman and she's trying to maintain like the classroom antics of the tweens. But is it like a show for her? Is it for adults? Is it for kids? It's really confusing because I feel like there were shows that really got it, you know, Head of the Class. It's the perfect example because it all took place at the school. Like they got it in the classroom. This is where it is. Miss Bliss doesn't manage that well, but also again, in the pilot, we had Jonathan Brandis, but Zach is hanging out at her house. Her former students are hanging out at her house, you know, and especially with Zach, whose dad she briefly has a little romantic interlude with in one episode. Like that's trouble. Now you're letting the son over at your house. Like that's just kind of awkward. But I think just overall, Haley Mills is not charismatic enough to carry a sitcom. Like she's lovable, you respect her, I guess, but the main thing I think it's the Schwarzenegger effect. They never explain why this British woman is in middle America as a teacher. Like she never references England. She's written as like a small town American gal, but the accent always gets in the way. Like to reference Head of the Class again, when Billy Connolly first appears in the last season, like he does give kind of a monologue explaining why a boisterous Scotsman is now teaching a bunch of geniuses, you know, in New York City, right? They don't do that here for Miss Bliss, and her accent is always the elephant in the room, I feel.
But see, that's interesting because it never really occurred to me. I never really thought of her as British. She just kind of had that like It's not transatlantic, but it's kind of like they do the same thing with Feeney, where like people assumed Feeney was British when he's just like he's from New England. And I kind of had that thing with Haley Mills. Like it comes out at times, but I thought it was kind of like her teacher voice. Like I think that's like what they teach him like year one at teaching school is like get your classroom voice ready. So the British thing never really hit me, but like you were saying, the tone is uneven and the show doesn't know what it wants to be. Because in the classroom, it wants to be head of the class, but then you get those Tina Miss Bliss episodes where it wants to be Gimme a Break, Nell and Addie with their like New York adventures. Again, 80s NBC. One thing we haven't really talked about though, and it's a big deal for just this franchise in that I can't speak to 80s Disney Channel. I don't know what that scheduling was like, but it was revolutionary that we were getting this live action sitcom in Saturday mornings. Once it becomes Saved by the Bell. Like there's a lot of argument as to why isn't this in prime time? Because it almost felt like, is it not strong enough for prime time? Can it not hold its own? We would later find out that would be the case with the college years, but we didn't have fleshed out multicam Saturday morning shows. And one thing that I've always said to people, like, I know there are a lot of people out there who hate Saved by the Bell because they blame it for killing Saturday mornings. And it's more of a symptom, but like it didn't single-handedly do that. One thing we have to think about is like, it changed television. It changed television to the point where there was certain humor that used to exist in prime time that then got relegated to children's time. Like Saved by the Bell is the template, of course, obviously, for California Dreams, Malibu CA, those shows. But then to go a step further, it created an industry that Disney Channel has gone to the bank with. There's no Raven's Home or That's So Raven or Jessie or Bunked or any of these shows without Saved by the Bell. Saved by the Bell was this like catalyst to say there's a certain brand of humor that families used to laugh at together that is now considered kid stuff. So Miss Bliss is uneven because I think they're starting to realize that, but they take a bold step with Saved by the Bell in saying kids are going to eat this up. It might not fly with adults because we're giving them Night Court and Hunter and all these other things, but kids are going to eat this up. And it would go on to be that way for like the next 12 years. So tonally, Miss Bliss is uneven, but it's for a reason, and they learned from their mistakes leading into Saved by the Bell.
Yeah, and that is true, especially when you look at the characters that transferred over. Like, for example, on Miss Bliss, Lisa is a nothing character in this series in terms of dialogue for her reason, even being in scenes. Like, she really does nothing. It's outside of the Stevie episode where she's like the president of the Stevie fan club. But Nikki is much more interesting, is written, she has opinions, and Lisa's just kind of there. But I'm kind of legitimately surprised that Lark Voorhees is the one who continued on, even though she proved herself to be hilarious and great on Saved by the Bell when they figured out what to do with her. But I guess they just didn't have the spoiled rich girl thing figured out yet during the Miss Bliss years. She wasn't defined enough. But yeah, so that's interesting. But also Mr. Belding in this series, he's kind of boring. Yes. Like he's the authoritarian giving Miss Bliss a hard time. He's not as ridiculously comic as he becomes, although about halfway through the series, he does develop his signature laugh. So that does come from Miss Bliss. So and they make a fool out of him. They do jokes to him, but he's still a little bit more of a fuddy-duddy kind of just like, oh, he's just like, this is not okay, Miss Bliss, type stuff. And the last thing I'll just say is Mikey as a character as written, and even just the actor himself, he's more 90210 angst. Like he plays it too straight, in my opinion. I feel like he'd be more at home as the kid on a soap opera than he is like a kid on a sitcom with quips. I don't know. He's too sincere, I guess is what it is, next to Zach.
Yeah. You said a lot of good things here that like got the wheels turning. For one thing, the casting choices are done deliberately, especially where we are in the world at that point in time. Just look at Captain Planet. It's like Lark is there to be the black girl. Like every franchise of that era has the black kid, he's probably called Hoops. There's the kid in the wheelchair who's called Wheels. Like, yeah, I'm talking about the Burger King Kids Club because it was the template for like every franchise at that point. And I've heard, and don't quote me on this because I can't cite it, and I have been on the internet now for like 30 years, but I always heard that Lisa Turtle was never written as black. Like Lisa Turtle was originally like a stereotypical Long Island girl. And that Lark just won the role, and they went with that because there are very few. When you get to main Saved by the Bell, yeah, but there are very few episodes that like Lisa is a black girl. Like they belong to the Malibu Sands Beach Club. That would be an issue sometimes, you know. And even like Mikey. Like the more we talk, I almost wish we had gotten Mikey instead of Slater, because if they're really going for a diverse cast, Mikey knew who he was. You know, like it takes till the college years for Slater to realize he was Mexican. And I'm like, we've watched you for 5 years and you didn't know? Like, you know, when it turns out he's AC Sanchez, you know? So it's like college years, we'll get to that. They want to do every very special episode imaginable. But like, I feel kind of like we lost something with Mikey the more I think about it. But because I saw AC first, I'm just gonna leave with the one that brung me, you know?
Yeah, fair enough. Fair enough. The last thing I just want to ask is there's the Screech factor. And Screech in this series is Dustin Diamond is the youngest member of the cast, but he is very sincere. He's fairly intelligent. He's just naive. He's a very sweet kid. And that's kind of what he is in the first season of Saved by the Bell as well, before they turn him into full shaggy, doofus category of character. Would you have liked to have seen him stay as this character, or do you think he needed to be like, full on Looney Tunes to make it
He
work?
needed to be full on Looney Tunes because we've talked about in this era you have to have your Jack A. It was just part of the times, but I appreciated the Miss Bliss screech mainly because one thing I really appreciate from Miss Bliss, and I've mentioned this online before because like it kind of bothers me, is that she's one of the few authority figures to call him by his name. Your principal should not be calling you by your nickname. You know, like he just becomes Screech Powers by like junior year of high school. And let's not forget, he comes back for the new class. So he plays this character for the better part of a decade, but the only one who ever respected him enough to call him by his name was Miss Bliss.
That is true. Well, our cheers and jeers have kind of been bleeding over. This has been a mixed bag. It's a confusing show in so many different ways. We have to, though, say what would have happened. Let's say they said, no, we can still make it work. We still want Haley Mills. What might have been? No, we'll never know. What might have been? The number one thing, Will, if this series had continued in this form, obviously the rest of the shows that we're going to talk about in this series would never have happened. And would have never gotten fantastic movies like Dead Man on Campus, Showgirls, or Screech, Saved by the Smell. Okay, so maybe that would have been a good thing overall, but the biggest thing to me is that Good Morning Miss Bliss getting another season would have meant that Heather Hopper would not have appeared as Tessa in Troop Beverly Hills, one of my favorite movies of all time. It should be mentioned that fellow Troop Beverly Hills cast member Carla Gugino also appeared on the first episode of Good Morning Miss Bliss. She was Zach's summer love, so there's all these child actors that got pulled into that movie. But seriously, though, when you think about Miss Bliss getting one more shot, what would that have changed?
People are going to hate me for this, especially Reginald Vell Johnson, but you don't get Urkel. And say what you will, Steve Urkel is 90s television. Like, I will die on that hill, for better or for worse. You kind of understand it because he's typecast and all that, that like he went on to nothing else. It's the same way the Cosby Show ruined this entire cast. You know, it was the #1 show on TV, and none of them can work now except for Malcolm Jamal Warner. So, like, we don't get Urkel. We probably don't get David Silver on 90210. He does a great job in that role, but I feel like Jonathan Brandis could have been David Silver. Like, it would have been interesting to see who tested for that role. So losing Brian Austin Green isn't the end of the world, but I don't know anyone else acting at the time who could have been Urkel. You know that at that point in time, it was probably down to Jaleel White, Alfonso Ribeiro, Bumper Robinson, and maybe Emmanuel Lewis. You know, like, there weren't working black boys at that time who would have fit into that template and sold it like it did. So I feel like the greatest sin was we wouldn't get Steve Urkel.
And that's a good point. Like, we should point out that, on this show, he was definitely not Urkel. He was just a real, like, kind of charismatic kid who was really fun, just a normal, average, not outlandish in any way. And I do think after, because that's like the pilot that did get picked up with Miss Bliss, he wasn't part of that cast, but you have to believe they would have cycled him back in. Like, seconds, he's like, what was he doing? Like, because when did Family Matters start? Was that 89 or 90? Like, that's
89, because
so maybe he was already cast, I guess, but I don't know.
Because you got to kick it off Perfect Strangers. Yeah, 89. But he shows up later. Maybe he shows up by 90, because he's not there in the beginning.
Right.
He's that like one episode guest star who the rest was history.
But it feels like Saved by the Bell, or Miss Bliss in this case, it feels like Miss Bliss would have brought him back because he was such a, like, I don't know why he didn't make it on the retooled version, because he really did stand out in a big way. He only gets one little joke monologue, really, but it's great.
Well, in your mind, if Miss Bliss gets a second season, is that second season on Disney Channel, or does NBC reclaim it and retool it?
It sounds like it was just an experiment for the Disney Channel that they just didn't support fully. They were just like, let's do it. Nah, this maybe doesn't fit what we're trying to do here. And so I do think either way, Miss Bliss would have been on NBC by that point, because like, okay, we work some kinks out. Let's get this Mark Paul Gosselaar kid over here. Let's work some new kids into the cast and see what we get. And I think that's where it would have been. That second season would have been a new reboot of the series on NBC again.
I wonder, this is kind of like a sidebar, but like, I read the autobiography of Brandon Tartikoff. I talk a lot about TV and all that, but like, I consider myself like a student of TV. I love TV. TV is my stepfather and it raised me. So I want to know how this stuff works. And Brandon Tartikoff is the guy turned NBC around. He's the one who shows up in the Johnny Dakota episode about like, hey, I've got this great idea about a show about some kids. NBC wouldn't have reached its heights to get them to must-see TV without Brandon Tartikoff. And sadly, he left and he went to Paramount and he died from a brain tumor around like 91. But like, having read that and like his stories of those shows, and then I look at what happened here, I don't know if Tartikoff would have given them a second chance, because he was just that kind of shrewd of a businessman. But I also want to take this time to point out, because this is kind of coloring Saved by the Summer and like our discussion of it, is that I'm always struck how this franchise is iconic. Like, it is the 80s. However, there is no official history of it whatsoever. There is Screech's book, which is all libel. And then when they were doing the podcast, the rewatch one with Mark Paul Gosselaar,
Zach to the Future.
Zach to the Future. It never finished.
Nope.
They made it to like the beach club, basically, and I'm still mad about that because we don't know what happened. But that's more of the mystery, because when they were doing that podcast, they would refer back to Peter Engel's book, and Mark Paul would say most of those stories weren't true. And I've often wondered why. Is it the money? Because based on when they did this, there's probably no residuals for this show. So it's like, yeah, everywhere he goes, he's Zach Morris, but he's struggling to pay his mortgage, which is why he's in pilot season every year. So it's that kind of thing of like, we're discussing this from a place of passion, but it's also trying to get some answers because there is no official oral history. They all seem to like each other. They're all willing to come back for reunions and whatnot, but you never get anything below the surface. We've never understood their motivations for certain choices with their characters. We've never heard from Elizabeth or Tiffany about season 5 from their mouths, and I find that interesting. Even near the end, Dustin kind of went off the reservation and went kind of crazy and told his stuff, but they had solidarity in not paying any attention to him. You don't find that these days from casts. With the internet, with podcasts, there would be someone like you would have Max on some podcast saying, like, oh yeah, I used to smoke with Elizabeth Berkley. Like, none of that's happening. We're forced to kind of draw our own conclusions here with the evidence that's available to us.
Yeah. And as we close out here, as we get into Saved by the Bell, the first appearance of this new cast of this new show was on a Saturday morning preview special that was on NBC in 1989, showing you what the new Saturday morning lineup was going to be. Will, we've watched this. Tell them just kind of about the setup. The setup is pretty fun.
I remember watching this when it aired. I'm almost gonna like cry because it's so sad that like the Saved by the Bell Peter Engel universe meant so much to me growing up. It's like football in the South, So it's one of those like I remember watching this Friday night before the season kicked off. Networks used to do this all the time. And what was it? It was Honey, We Shrunk Saturday Morning. I think that's the title of it. We're introduced to the cast of Saved by the Bell right there. We don't know who these kids are, but they're pretty kids. They seem like they have charisma. And what happens is a lot of these shows are really built on network synergy. So they pull in established stars and actresses to kind of like get you comfortable with the new stuff. So we're introduced to the Saved by the Bell cast, and they can't find Zach and Screech because somehow this beam blasted them into the TV. So we're already in this adventure. We don't know these kids, but they seem cool enough. They're in TV and they have to find their way out. So it's kind of like a thinly veiled Wizard of Oz, follow the circuit road kind of premise. And through that, hey, look, they stumbled upon Alf. And Alf's talking to him because he's the biggest thing since sliced bread at that point. Because this would have been like season 3 of Alf around that time, basically. So they talk to him a little bit. He sends them on their way. And then they send a message through the TV like, hey, this is what happened to us. You guys got to come save us. But it turns out Marsha Warfield from Night Court happens to be this teacher that we will never see on Saved by the Bell. But she's got 2 Dobermans with her. She's wearing like a leather pantsuit that is trying to look militaristic but isn't. So she tells them if Screech and Zach are not back in school in 2 hours, they're expelled. So then that means Lisa and Slater run over to Screech's house to turn off the machine, and they get zapped into the TV. And I found this really interesting. You and I haven't talked about this, but did you notice how that means Kelly and Jessie are left outside of the TV, which is almost this foreshadowing that no one could have imagined, because once we pull this Saved by the Bell train into the station, there's not going to be a Kelly and a Jessie, So now you've got the 4 of them in there, and then they run across, this is the saddest thing, they could afford John Candy. John Candy shows up to promote Camp Candy.
Yeah.
But they can't afford Pat Morita. Because they talk to Pat Morita in this crystal, and I'm fairly certain that's probably like some animation guy doing Pat Morita's voice. I don't think that's actually him, but he's promoting the one and done Karate Kid animated series. And then they find their way to the wizard, and who should be that wizard? And this ties so perfectly into our last episode. He's like the Wizard of TV, played by Sherman Hemsley. George Jefferson himself, only this time he is on Amen as Deacon Ernie Fry in this period of his career. And he tells them that he has an open slot in his schedule and they would be perfect for it. And they're like, what do you mean? And he's like, I'll show you. And then there's like this montage of like footage from Saved by the Bell. They're like, what does the title even mean? Saved by the Bell? He's like, oh, you'll see. So then they get like blasted out of the TV just in time for Marsha Warfield to come back into detention, and the bell rings. And Slater goes, oh, Saved by the Bell. And there you go.
Oh, it's wild. There is one other Saved by the Bell connection in there. Very early, once the four of them are inside. But they run into this other guy. He looks like he's going to be the wizard also. He's got a top hat. He's got this cape and everything. But it's John Machina, a.k.a. the Micro Machines guy, who plays Mr. Testaverde on the first season of Saved by the Bell. So that was just so cool to see him, that he was in the mix as well. But he looks more like kind of Willy Wonka, I guess you would say.
I totally forgot about him, but it's a sin to forget the Micro Machine Man from 1990 era. So, forgive me, audience.
Yeah, but the strangest thing about it all to me, though, because they are in character, it's written, Slater is making sexist jokes. It's all there, but there's no laugh track. And without the laugh track, it really makes you second guess. Are these characters likable or not? Are they annoying or not? Are they sexist or not? It is so weird, especially with Slater's stuff. I'm just I don't know about this. Because without the laugh track to inform us that, oh, no, this is a joke. This isn't an actual opinion this character has. Or if it is, it's meant to be ridiculous, And I was just what if they had gone that route? What if they had not given Saved by the Bell a laugh track? There's no way that we would have been able to connect with those characters. It does so much of the work for them. And I never thought about that before.
I will bet you $20 that somewhere on YouTube, someone has removed the laugh track from Saved by the Bell to give us that entire scenario.
That is for sure. Well, now here's the thing. Saved by the Bell, we know. Will has already said, iconic. We love it. We've shared our opinions of some of the things that we loved about it before. But next episode, we're not talking about Saved by the Bell. You've seen it. You know it. Those episodes are burned into your brain, so we're taking you beyond Bayside to a whole new higher education experience, Saved by the Bell, the college years. Yes, we're going to follow the adventures of Zach, Slater, Screech, and eventually Kelly on campus at a California university. So we hope that you will join us for that discussion of a sequel series. Very interesting experiment. Were you watching it at the time? If not, then you will get caught up with our discussion there. We're very excited to keep this series running all summer long. But in the meantime, Will, if people want to share with you their love of television, especially the NBC lineup at this time, where can they find you online?
They can find me on the socials at William B. West or my website, westweekever.com.
Yes, indeed. And you can find me at Hoju Coolander on all the socials. Of course, everything we're doing here is in collaboration with Geekster, which is at theretronetwork.com. If you want to find us on YouTube, we're also there. So you can actually subscribe to the Retro Network TRN TV YouTube channel. You can stream Remember That Show there as well. So we hope that you will find us any way you can. Spread the word, share it with people that you know are like-minded and TV obsessed, as we all are. But until next time, class dismissed.